Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus, and we are here today with Trevor McGregor. Trevor, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me back, Mike. It's great to be here.
Trevor is a high-performance coach, and actually, Trevor is the man behind why we are here today. I worked with Trevor for some time, and he was the one who pushed, probably more than push, kick, pull, cattle prod to go ahead and start this thing, and it's been a great experience. So thank you, Trevor. I will let Trevor. So Trevor, give us a little introduction again to what you do and what's new with you.
Well, thank you again. And yes, congrats on the podcast as you are lining them up and knocking them down. And, not only the stuff that you're sharing with your listeners, but some of the guests that you brought on are some of the best of the best of the best in real estate. So huge props to you. And as for me, you know me, I'm as busy as it ever, gets with being a real estate investor myself. I'm also a high performance, peak performance master coach, helping, business owners and doctors and attorneys and franchisees and real estate investors really identify, what's the resistance or really what's the friction that's preventing them from going out and crushing their goals. And so as a high performance coach, just like we've done some work together, I help them get rid of that resistance or get rid of that friction to go out there and achieve higher levels of success in their careers, finances, their health, their real estate, their fulfillment, their relationships. Travel, we leave no stone unturned. And I'll tell you, Michael, it is as busy as ever. The world is sped up so fast and people have so much coming at them that they're looking for somebody to support them. And that's where I come in. So between the real estate and the coaching, that's what's keeping us busy. And then my family and I, we're doing some amazing travels from Australia to North America, to Europe, to Asia. We are all over this beautiful blue planet. This year seems to be the year of travel. And so we're really excited about hosting masterminds and meetups and a whole bunch of different things, on our own and with other clients that I coach around the world as well. So that's really what I'm up to.
That's so awesome. You know what, when you're talking about that and the travel, and I think for a lot of docs that, although, we may have a decent amount of vacation, if you can take 2, maybe 3 big trips a year while working full time, that's a big push. And, so you've kind of unlocked a bigger, as you call it, location freedom to be able to travel more, but still run your business, still make a living.
That's it. Yeah. Everywhere we go, Mike, I'm either doing coaching calls, consulting calls, real estate calls. Like I said, we do a lot of retreats and masterminds. And so when you think of a high performer, like a doctor or a surgeon or someone in the medical field, it's really got to that point where you're multifaceted. It's not just, you do one thing and that's it. Most high performers have multiple streams of income. Just like you have medical income and you've got real estate income, you might monetize the podcast. You've got all of these different things that you and your spouse and your girls are doing. It's the same thing with us. We're looking to really remember that where there's impact, there's income, and that we're at that point where we've worked hard so that we can do it from different regions around the world. It wasn't always like that. But again, for those that are not just interested, but are committed, we often say that for the committed, there's always a way.
That's awesome. When you hear from docs, so this is, I think what you're talking about here is you're talking about smart people. They've accomplished a lot. They got through medical school and residency and all these things. And it's so easy to look at the knowledge or the process and go, yeah, I can do that. But that we trip ourselves up. And how much of it, and I think that's such a key thing, is the headspace or the plan, the implementation. How much of this do you see, and kind of what are the keys for people here?
Well, it's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked, because I think you remember that roughly 42% of my client load, my current client load, are doctors. they're physicians, they're surgeons, they're medical professionals. And so when you really think about it, if we go all the way back to when you folks went to college and university, you were always told, go to this class, read this textbook, report to the hospital here, wear this pager here. And it kind of breaks that creative spirit because you're very methodical and you're always thinking about if this, then that, which, for doctors is pretty important to do. I'm not negating it. But there's also this side of doctors where I get them to think outside the box, to get them to become more creative, to think about what would be possible if ... And for some doctors, that might be, literally going overseas for the first time in years for a week or 10 days. For some doctors, heaven forbid, they put 2 weeks together to go overseas to Paris or Italy or maybe Asia. And so you start to think and behave differently by asking better questions. And I think most doctors, will tell me all of the reasons why they can't do certain things. Whereas a high performance coach, we say, is that really true? Or why do you have that story? Or how long have you had that story? Or who would you be if you didn't have that story? And we created what we call a better story. And that's where we start to see through a different lens. And again, depending upon what stage you're at in your career, maybe you can't do it as easily in your late 20s or early 30s, but certainly doctors that I coach, men and women that are in their 40s, late 40s, early 50s, they start to see that, there's a whole new way of thinking and behaving, and that travel is one of the big things on their bucket list. And they don't want to wait till they're 65 to do it. They want to get that thing going. And so again, we open up what's called a new paradigm of thinking. And that's where this whole thing gets started. But do those questions, and does that concept make sense to you?
That's awesome. I can't tell you how many times I probably told you or somebody else, I can't because.
Yes.
And then as I started to make this transition and wanted to work differently, was investing differently, the number of times when I talked to other doctors that I heard that, well, we can't do that because, I can't do that because, and there's always these becauses. For somebody who finds themselves, how do you get people to start realizing that they're building themselves into a box, and it's not these other things, it's just their mindset that's the box?
Well, again, I think there's a two-pronged answer to your question. Number one is that box is always, this is how I've always done it. Because if I back up a little bit, we have three modalities of understanding time, Mike. We have what's called the familiar past, we've got the present, and we've got what's called the predictable future. Now, because we have more references to the past than the present or the predictable future, we tend to make decisions from our past. And for a lot of doctors that are on the tools or that work night shifts or work, hospitals, clinics, these could be urologists, these could be cardiologists, these could be plastic surgeons. All of them have that familiar past that says, I need to be close to the hospital, or I only get this much time off per year, or I don't want to, go without making the money that allows me to live this lifestyle of the house, the cars, the kids, and everything else. And so you've got to really start by remembering that we really can't create our best life thinking from our past. We've got to step out of the familiar past and into the present to create what we call a vision of the future. And when I do that with doctors, oftentimes we'll say, well, what are your goals for the next year or the next 3 or 5 years or the next 10 or 15 or 20 years? And they'll go, well, Trevor, I'd like to make more money. I'd like to have more time back. I'd like to travel more. I'd like to, have a side hustle or, do something in real estate. And I really want to hang around with like-minded people because high tide lifts all boats. And so as we start to get into the goal setting, oftentimes they will start to see something they want to move towards. But again, that resistance or that friction comes up where they go, that's for other people, or I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I'm too, fill in the blank here, where they will start to rationalize. And if we break that word into two, we often tell ourselves rational lies. We lie to ourselves why we can't have it. And so what I do with that is instead of just saying, all right, what are your goals for the future? I kind of come at it with a little bit of my own genius here, and some of it comes from Tony Robbins, because as you know, I had the blessing to work with and for Tony Robbins for half a decade as one of his top coaches. But he taught me this thing where he says, wouldn't it be cool if dot, dot, dot. So instead of saying, what are your goals for the future? I say, all right, Mike, wouldn't it be cool if you could dot, dot, dot? And for you, that might be, well, I want to travel more. I want to ski more. I want to spend more time with the girls. I want to spend more time doing real estate. And if you start to really think about it, we're all conscious creators. We've all got the ability to go from wherever we are to where we want to be. But I challenge people to go beyond that to a place where, they start to dream again. They start to think bigger. They start to think bolder. And for some doctors, that might mean that maybe they're working full time and at some point they work half time or 3/4 time or, some lesser thing so that they can go out there and live what we call chapter 2 of their life. And it's really from a place of opportunity, possibility, optimism, gamification, courage might be something we throw on the pile because it's not for everyone. But it's for the people that are defiantly ready to break free of whatever story they've been telling themselves to rewrite that story and live their best life. What do you think of that?
It hits so many key points of the journey. When you said something about that they want to hang out with like-minded people, how often do you find that the people they're around are the biggest holdup? The doctors, you're in the doctor's lounge or your family, because you're probably hanging around people who are similar to you. That's what we do. And so that the story in our mind, the story from our peers is the story of our past. Do you ever have to tell people like you need to go make some new friends?
Just about daily, Mike, just daily. But yeah, I mean, you bring up the water cooler at the clinic or the hospital, the lunchroom, people saying, what are you doing this weekend? I mean, we're all, we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. That's what scientists have measured. And believe it or not, those 60 to 80,000 thoughts we have a day, roughly 75% of them are negative or are survival based. So the minute that you introduce something new to a doctor in the lunchroom or near the water cooler, they kind of give you that, third eye look where they go, you got to be kidding. And it's something that you've experienced, right? And you've got other doctors that are almost like the crabs in the bucket. If you know the analogy, whenever a crab tries to crawl out of a bucket, the other crabs pull that crab down. They don't want it to escape. They don't want it to be free. And I find that in the medical community and in the law community and a lot of the businesses that I coach, even the Fortune 500 companies, because I coach people at Microsoft, American Express, JP Morgan, it's almost the same thing. They're worried that you might outpace them, out-earn them, outlive them, out-experience them, and therefore they want to pull you back down. And so I have to really, say, are the people that you're surrounding yourself with helping you to become the best version of yourself, or are they hindering you becoming the best version of yourself? And another example of that, you and I were recently at the same real estate conference, the best ever conference in Salt Lake City. And I love seeing you there, and I saw you there last year. And it takes time, it takes money, it takes energy to go out to these conferences. But when you look at the people that were in those rooms, I mean, those people are literally playing life at the highest level. And that old tide that, a high tide lifts all boats is really true, because we get a little bit of inspiration, then we get a little bit of perspiration, we get a little bit of possibility and gamification and courage, because again, it's almost like they're helping elevate us and we're helping them or us elevate them. And that's where, we all take on a whole new identity of being a high performer. So I'll throw that back to you for reflection. What do you think of that?
I think that's great. And the crabs in the bucket is such a great analogy. And my experience as I was exiting, and maybe not just that they don't want you to outpace them, but if you crawl out of the bucket, you shatter the paradigm that there's nothing outside of the bucket. And I saw a lot of people that like me quitting caused them fear or
Yes.
uncomfortableness, that talking about it, you would see that like that third eye or that twitch start, that it was messing up the whole, like we suffer, like as doctors, I think there's been this, it's okay to make money, but you have to suffer for it. or that this is my path and for some reason I have to stay on it.
Yes.
And you justify things, especially if you're suffering, you justify your suffering. And when somebody else says, "Nope, I'm not going to suffer anymore," and throws it away, they're like, "Wait a minute, that's crazy. You can't do that." But it's more the emotional impact it has on them that maybe the stories they're telling themselves aren't true, and they're not ready to admit that.
That's exactly it. But even some of the language that people would say, why would you throw away the career as being a surgeon or a doctor? It's really not throwing it away. It's really honoring the heck out of yourself for how far you've come, but really understanding that, you know what? There's a whole new world out there. Maybe some of it's in medicine, but some of it might be in business, in e-commerce, in real estate, in travel, in doing something with your spouse. Because again, for a lot of doctors, it's Groundhog Day. And I hate to say this, but in America, it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher to go into the hospital or the clinic, given all of the, changes in healthcare, and some doctors are having their salaries reduced, and some doctors are, going to be made redundant by AI in the years to come. And so I'm not here to throw cold water on it, because we'll always need, good doctors. But at the end of the day, what if this was all happening for you instead of to you? What if this was the universe's way of saying, all right, you've done your 10, 15, 20 years as a surgeon or a doctor or urologist, whatever you are, but there's a whole new chapter of possibility where you could take your income to a higher level. You could have more time. You could have more travel. You could have more fulfillment. Because, Michael, at the end of the day, that's really what we're after. We want the houses and the cars and the jewelry and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, what makes people the most happy is experiences that lead to fulfillment. And that is really going back to the 6 human needs that you and I have talked about ad nauseum, where, we always say that we're only really out there trying to fulfill 6 things. And that is number 1, our need for certainty, our need for number 2, variety, our need for number 3, which is significance, number 4 is connection, but 5 and 6 are really what we really want, which is 5 is growth and 6 is contribution. So if we get the certainty, variety, significance, connection, growth, and contribution, I'm telling you, that's where higher levels of fulfillment live. And we just love getting up in the morning and going out there to really live our best life, versus somebody that just thinks I'm stuck, or this is the way it is, or I got the golden handcuffs. My wife won't let me. My husband won't let me. People will think I'm crazy. And it's really those people that break the mold that go out there and really, open up that chapter 2 in a powerful way.
Yeah, that's interesting. All those different voices that you hear from your spouse and your friends and the water cooler. And when you're in the same environment, you keep hearing those voices. And, it's funny, there was a point in my journey between working with coaches like you, starting to hang out with real estate investors. And I pretty much have an Audible book on all the time in the car. I don't listen to much else. And a lot of stuff, when I started listening to stuff from entrepreneurs and tech startup guys, because their perspective is so different. And all the stories of, like minimal viable product, making something just good enough to put out in the market and see what the market says, or failure as steps to success. And, and all these different things, that the voices in my head changed. And I remember one day it hit me. I was talking to some doctors, and as they were giving these excuses as to why they couldn't do something, I had these other voices playing in my head.
Yes.
And instead, the more powerful voices became the voices in my head of people who had built $1 million empires, or people who had built huge things and failed and come back. People who had made scary changes. And then all of a sudden I'm listening to them and I'm like, you guys don't get it. I was like, wow, I got different voices in my head. And I think to me, that was a huge thing, is just the amount of repetition, the amount of time in the car, that it started competing time wise, the voices I was hearing, with the time I was spending with people saying it wasn't possible. There was becoming the same or more time with voices that were saying it is possible, and not only possible, but if you put in the work and you take the chance and you fall down and you get back up, it's almost inevitable that you're going to achieve something.
Well, I love that. And you're really bringing up two things in my mind that I think, we've talked about in our time together, but it would be very valuable for the listener that those voices are normal. So don't make them good or bad. Don't make them right or wrong, but really think about what the narrative is because it's coming from one of two places. It's either coming from your saboteur, and that's the name that we give the lower self, or the self that says, I could never change, or it's going to be hard. And we even give these saboteurs names like the avoider, the procrastinator, the stickler. I mean, you remember these,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
The judge. Oh my gosh, a hyper rational, where they will literally keep you playing small because they don't want to see you get hurt, right? Or they don't want to see you lose money, or they don't want to see you make a mistake. But there's a polarity to the saboteur called the wise sage, and that's spelled SAGE. And that sage is the wisdom that exists within you. It lives in your head, but also your heart and your gut. It's almost, when you know something, even before you think it, that's the path that you were really meant to go down. Maybe it was, asking your spouse to marry you. Maybe it was choosing the city you wanted to, go to college in. Maybe it was some big decision, but you didn't let your saboteur make it. You let your sage make it. And now your life is radically awesome because you followed your heart and your gut. What if that was true in your mid 40s, your late 40s, your early 50s, where you turn down the volume of the saboteur and you turn up the volume of the wise sage? Because I'm telling you, we all have it. And it's called the law of polarity, just like you can't have day without night, or black without white, or masculine energy without feminine energy. You can't have the saboteur, Mike, without also having access to the wise sage. And I know that you've had to listen to both those voices in the past few years to really see which one you're going to feed. But how does it feel to you to have weakened that saboteur and really strengthened the muscle of the sage? How's that been for you?
It still doesn't become an all one direction. It does go back and forth, and it's almost like you get used to the sage, and you're making progress, and you're making progress, and then you hit some plateau, or you come to the next big challenge. You step into the unknown, and the saboteur voice comes back, and all of a sudden it gets scary again, and it's because it's so interesting. I mean that when I went from full time to part time was a very positive thing. Like, all right, I got all this time to do stuff. I don't have as much money coming in, but I still had a really good income coming in. And so it was this smooth thing that was all wonderful. When I left the medical practice, it was totally different. It became, even though there was nothing new had happened, like crossing over that line, there was a plan in place. There were some unknowns. There were some scary things, but I'd also looked at staying in practice as an opportunity cost because of the time and energy it took that was keeping me from doing other things. But as soon as that old known really went away, and I didn't step into like with the plan to move and all this, there wasn't really much of a fallback. And I know those fallbacks are there, but it became instantly terrifying. I mean, my last day of work, I was so like, oh, I just got to get through this day. And by the time I was done, I had to leave the office. I was so over being there. Like I got to go. And I had plans to go to lunch with my wife. So it gave me a nice excuse to just wrap it up and leave. I'd already emptied out my office. And so I left, and I was so like, oh my goodness, so great to be out of there. This is awesome. And then that next morning I woke up 3 a.m. with heartburn, cold sweat, like, oh my goodness, what's happened? I have no job. I have no plan for a job. And it was totally terrifying. And this hasn't been an easy, like, go away thing. And the funny thing is, and I talked about this a little bit on the show with some folks, is as I talk to everybody who's done this, whether they left a big job in finance, a big job in tech, and even a couple docs who retired in their 60s, they're all like, no, it's absolutely terrifying. I went through it too. And I was like, what? I I couldn't believe it. And a retired doc who he retired initially at 63, went back to work, retired again at 66. And he's like, no, no, no. We spent like decades training our brain to be stressed, to be worried about this thing that was going to happen and be ready for it. And all of a sudden, we take away the stimuli that feeds those worries, and the brain is still a habit, is looking for things to be worried about, and will
Yes.
dig up anything to be worried about. And you can rationally dig through it and start pushing it back down, and then it comes back like, "Are you sure? Are you sure you have enough money to live for a year without a job?" And you're like, "Yes, I've done the numbers 100 times in the last year." But
Yep.
it's still, the saboteur finds a way back in, and I think as we try and grow, it's always there. I mean,
That's it.
like you said, that's the polarity. There's that
Well,
push and pull you can't get away from.
it is. And then that's the beautiful thing about life is there's polarity in everything. Like I said, you can't have one thing without the polar opposite. And that's where the universe gets you to step up. That's where the universe gets you to ask better questions. Because at the end of the day, we're always seeking three things. We're seeking approval, we're seeking control, or we're seeking safety. Now, you want to write that down because especially doctors that on the disc and values profile are oftentimes high SCs, which means they're very methodical, they're very diligent, they're very process oriented. They will always have to think about what are the next 7 things that I can, put to get to where I want to go. Is oftentimes they will not give themselves approval to change. They will feel out of control if something changes, or they don't feel safe. So that whole thing around approval, control, and safety means you've got to give yourself a little bit more approval to try something else. You got to give up control to gain control. And you got to feel safe knowing that other doctors have also gone part-time, or other doctors have perhaps gone half-time, or other doctors have left, or other doctors have got into real estate. And you've certainly had enough physicians on this show of other people that I coach, like Dr. Vikram Raya, right? He was a cardiologist that literally left that for a different life. Dr. Elaine Stoggerberg, she was a psychiatrist, a doctor of psychiatry that left to do real estate. Dr. Dinesh Patel, an orthopedic surgeon. And I can come up with actually client after client after example. And a ton of them, Mike, where it's scary in the beginning of thinking about it. It's messy in the middle, and then it's absolutely beautiful when they come out the other side. But it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for everybody. Some people love medicine so much that they're going to stay in their lane, and that's just the way it is. Some people are going to be a hybrid of medicine and something else. And then some people are going to get to that point where they go, you know what? I have really done my service in medicine. It's time for me to move on. And that's just the way it is. But the approval, the control, and safety of that is something we all have to work through. It was like me leaving corporate, or me leaving Tony Robbins after, doing, so many coaching sessions for millionaires and billionaires, that I went out on my own for Trevor McGregor International. And now there's no safety net of clients. I have to go out there and find clients, just like I have to go out there and find real estate deals. So at the end of the day, I don't think we're that far removed from the fact that if you want to create something new, you've got to really think about giving up the story or the old to create that safe space to move forward. What do you think?
Now, I think it's when you talk about where we are, like naturally as a person, and that people who need more control and more safety probably lean towards becoming doctors, lawyers, where it's a path that has security in the path. If I do A, I get B, and then
Yep.
I do C and I get D. And so we end up going down this path, or that we're told that that's the best path. And I think a lot of the time that's where a lot of us ended up, because in my upbringing, I liked the adventure, but I was told that you need to go down this road to support a family. And on the other side, you have the entrepreneurial, the people, like if you look at Elon Musk, who just throws the rule book out over and over again, obviously has a different base mindset on how much security he needs, or, and those types of things. So we're all a little different. But I think when we look at doctors as a whole, by the time you're a doctor, you've either were naturally that way, or you've been trained to be that way. And
That's
then
right.
to let that go is a hard thing because it is, you're retraining your brain to
Yep.
look at it differently and say, wait, it doesn't have to be this way.
That's it. But if you go back, and I'll challenge some doctors, even if you go back 100, 200, 300 years, if you think about it, hospitals weren't even around. You might have a town doctor, if he was even a real doctor, that helped people when they were sick. He helped them get better. Everyone else was an entrepreneur. They were a farmer, a butcher, a blacksmith. They did something that really, was entrepreneurial. And it wasn't until, the world wars and factories and hospitals and all of this, new age stuff where we started to go work for somebody else. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I also take doctors back to, well, what if we all have those creative codes? What if we all have that entrepreneurial spirit from a couple 200, 300 years ago? What if we all had to figure out a path outside of medicine? Because, I've even got doctors who get to that stage where they have an accident or something goes on with their hands, or they, have a real bum neck from looking down doing surgery so many times that they have no choice but to reinvent themselves and move beyond medicine and into real estate or into something else, into what we call the next great chapter of their life. So whether it is something you want to do or, heaven forbid, something you're forced to do, we all have to go through this chaotic vibration to really, get rid of what we call that law of familiarity, to step into that unfamiliarity, but believing that, for the committed, there's always a way, and that whatever answers you're seeking or whatever you need, the universe has provided you for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and it's just not going to abandon you because you set your stethoscope down. The universe is omnipotent, and it will bring you the people, the opportunities, the money, the things that you need, because ultimately that's how it's been designed. And so I think people have to really appreciate that it's really in your decisions that your destiny is created. And for somebody like you that has absolutely served beautifully in medicine for so long, you were ready for this next adventure. And that's where we go. We don't know how long we're going to be on this planet, but I'd rather go out there and have the adventure than, sit in safety, because there's a great quote, Mike, that great ships weren't built to stay safe in the harbor. Great ships were built to go out there and sail the seven seas. And that's what I'm doing. And I know that that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that, because when you hear the stories of a doctor who you lost your hands or whatever, or something like that. And I remember having these thoughts when I would hear these stories, like somebody like once said something like, well, what if you lost your license? And my gut reaction was like, that would be awesome. And because it was this desire to do something different, to make a change, but the fear was keeping me from doing it. Or I couldn't see the path yet to change. And I don't think it's just, even if you're not just leaving medicine, or you want to practice medicine different, you want to do it in a different environment.
Yes.
That if somebody's always been employed, to start their own practice, or all of these things where doing it different can be the scariest part. And I want to get into this just a little bit more about how you can help somebody take that scary leap. And that scary leap could be leaving just investing in the stock market and investing in real estate. It could be changing your job and all those things, that if you're not kicked out of the boat, how do you get out of the boat? So with that, I'm going to wrap up this first half of our conversation with Trevor McGregor. Trevor, thank you so much for being here. For everybody listening, please join us for the second half of this conversation with Trevor McGregor, and thank you for being here today on Surgeon Syndicate.
This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.